She knelt alone beneath the alien lights. Ilara Vance. Not a soldier, not a warrior, just a diplomat from Earth sent to speak peace in a galaxy that no longer believed in peace. The light above her wasn't kind. It didn't flicker. It didn't hum. It simply was perfect and clinical, without warmth or mercy. She wore a formal coat, its collar torn, her boots still carrying the dust of a dozen alien worlds, where she'd tried and failed to be heard. A voice echoed across the chamber. It wasn't a voice made for ears. It came from all directions, filtered through translation nodes that smoothed the cruelty until it sounded reasonable. Insolent persistence, unauthorized sovereignty claims, violation of integration protocols, correction authorized. Ilara didn't flinch. Her hands were bound at the wrists. Her knees rested against metal that had held thousands before her. Her eyes, bright and unblinking, met the camera drone floating a meter from her face. Somewhere across the galaxy, billions watched. Her lips parted. "We never came to conquer," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud. "We came to remember." The drone tilted, and then the floor opened. Not with a trap door, not with ceremony, just a hiss, a glow, and the sound of bones meeting energy too bright to name. She screamed once. Then, nothing. The screen went black. Then the accord seal appeared, a spinning spiral, sharp and clean, set against a crimson star. It hovered for exactly 3 seconds before the second voice spoke, colder than the first. "The Sol system has 6 planetary cycles to comply. Failure will result in sterilization." Back on Earth, the feed played across every surface. Cities froze, streets emptied. The video didn't buffer or stall. It had already been burned into every satellite, every channel, every system, from deep ocean cables to orbiting comm arrays. A boy in Sao Paulo dropped his spoon and stared. A girl in Cairo backed away from the shop window where Ilara's scream echoed. In New Delhi, an entire metro line paused, passengers watching in mute horror as the Diplomat vanished in light. Even in the bunkers of power, presidents and premiers stood still, hands raised halfway to their chins, unable to complete a single sentence. No network responded, no official spoke, because they knew. The last diplomat hadn't been silenced, she'd been displayed. Far above them, in a quiet orbital station overlooking the Pacific, Admiral Terran Vance sat alone in the command observatory. He watched the footage a second time, then a third. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He didn't move when her face disappeared into that sterile, white light. He only stood when the recording reached its end. On the desk before him sat an encrypted slate. It held Ilara's final private message, sent before the accord severed all diplomatic channels. Her voice in that recording wasn't afraid. It wasn't angry either. It was something deeper. "I didn't come to win, Terran. I came to make them see us. If they can't see, then maybe they'll hear. And if they can't hear, I hope you're still listening." He set the slate down gently, and then he walked to the comm pad, placed his palm on it, and said 4 words. "Assemble Earth Strategic Command." In Geneva's underground council chamber, the silence was finally broken. "It's war," someone muttered. "We're not ready," said another. "Our fleet won't hold." The accord destroyed Jupiter Station in minutes. They murdered our diplomat on a live broadcast. That wasn't strategy, that was humiliation. Voices clashed, a dozen languages speaking one shared fear. Then the screen at the head of the room lit up. Darren Vance appeared. No uniform, no insignia, just his eyes, the same eyes that had watched his sister die on loop. "The accord has made its demand," he said. 6 days, surrender or sterilization." He looked down, just for a moment, then back up. "We don't have weapons to match them. We don't have time to build them, and we don't have the luxury of doubt." The council listened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "We don't fight to win," he said. "We fight to break." On Mars, deep within the old terraforming labs, engineers received silent orders. On Luna, seismic stabilizers once meant for colonization were retasked. In Earth's crust, hidden under mountain ranges and ocean floors, ancient engines began to wake. Machines never built for war, now being turned toward it. The skies stayed quiet. But underground, Earth had begun to move. And above, the Accord watched with amusement. They didn't see preparation. They saw chaos. Their mistake. The asteroid colonies were the first to burn. Not because they held weapons, not because they held threats. They burned because they were far and easy to reach, because they were human. The Accord fleets moved without pause, glassing rock mines and oxygen domes as if scraping frost from a window. The debris drifted silently across space, shattered habitat rings, cargo haulers ripped in half, and thousands of tiny, frozen figures still locked in zero-G routines they'd never finish. And still, no reply from Earth. None. Not until a single human vessel broke formation and turned directly toward them. The Levrin Blade wasn't a warship. It was a colonial long hauler, refitted during the crisis years to carry an oversized fusion core and point defense turrets built from salvage. Its hull plating was mismatched. Its engines coughed every time they burned too long. But inside it had teeth. And a crew who knew this would be their last mission. Captain Darren Vale stood on the bridge, his boots braced wide against the vibration rolling up through the floor as the ship accelerated toward the nearest Accord cruiser. There were no tactical uplinks, no calls for support. Just a vector, a timer, and a silent promise to die for something that mattered. Behind him, Lieutenant Fex adjusted the final calibration on the sensor array. His forehead was bleeding, a deep crease opened by a falling panel during the last shockwave. He hadn't mentioned it. The blood had dried in a line down to his jaw. "The core's ready," Fex said. "Tripwire tuned to 10-meter proximity." Vale didn't look at him. He was watching the enemy ship grow larger on the forward display. It looked too clean, too precise. A long, mirrored blade that reflected the stars like it had been polished for the occasion. "Spin the data module," Vale said. "No interruptions. I want every millisecond of harmonic fluctuation when we hit." Fex smirked, despite the blood. "They're not going to like what we're sending." "They don't have to like it, they just have to feel it." The Levrin blades struck the Accord cruiser amidships, just under the command channel's spine. The detonation was brief, but surgical. Plasma rupture, harmonic bloom, then absolute silence. What mattered wasn't the explosion. It was the packet sent 6 seconds before. One compressed burst. Shield variants signatures. Vibration echo shifts, weak spots. It was ugly, unfiltered, and most of it would be lost in transmission. But not all of it. Back in lunar orbit, inside a buried control station beneath the old Sea of Tranquility, Admiral Taryn Vance stared at the display. The signal was already being decrypted. A dozen lines of code flashed past. Readings, frequencies, field collapse timing. The tech officer to his right didn't speak. She just nodded once. It was enough. "They're dying to map the walls," Vance said quietly. "Every run a probe, every corpse a sensor." "They're not waiting for us to finish the weapon," the tech officer replied. "They're the weapon," Vance said. Then he turned. "Get me a trajectory analysis for the Gliese Theater. Show me which of our ships are still mobile." "You want more runs?" she asked. "I want more lessons." On the Kestrel Spite there were no seats left. Every usable panel had been pulled open for extra sensor bandwidth. The crew had rigged a ship's cargo bay with reflective pulse generators, hoping to bounce the Accord's own fire back at them. Long enough, maybe, to scrape a reading before the hull gave out. The captain of the Spite, a wiry man named Cole Marek, was missing his left arm. Lost it 2 years ago in a mining accident. Now the stump, held a brace that pulsed every time he leaned forward in his seat. "We're not getting through," his nav officer said. "No," Cole agreed, "but the data might." He leaned closer to the comm panel and whispered something only the ship would hear. "Burn hot, hit hard, make them remember the shape of us." Then they punched their core and vanished in a starburst 20 kilometers from an Accord dreadnought's bow. From the enemy's side, it made no sense. Fleet Director Vroom watched the third human cruiser detonate on its own terms. He adjusted his perception lens, triple-checked for power spikes, irregular shield feedback, irregular propulsion patterns. None. It was, as far as he could see, madness. 3 self-detonations in 12 spans, said the ship's signal analyst. All approached with no combat transmission, no survival protocols. "No commands?" Brune asked. "No, only hard-coded bursts." The director narrowed his focus. "The air probing our frequency architecture with suicide vessels." "It appears so." Brune fell quiet. "Then, that is not desperation, that is intent." Aboard the Valis Rune, Sergeant Mikhail Dre floated alone in a compartment blown wide open. His legs were gone. The rest of him was held together by pressure foam and what was left of his EVA suit. He had 12 seconds of oxygen, a comms chip the size of his thumbnail, and a direct line of sight to a damaged Accord command pod. He coughed once, blood, then forced the chip into the transmission panel on the wall beside him. The lights flickered. He felt them dim, like the ship was shivering. He looked at the enemy cruiser ahead of him and muttered, "You think we're dead already?" He spat once, then listened. He triggered the pulse. Back on Luna, they received it. Another payload of shield interference, command bleed, and ship thought noise. It wasn't clean, it wasn't sharp, but it was exactly what Vance had asked for. Another death, traded for knowledge. Another step closer to striking back. And deep within Earth, below magma chambers and cracked tectonic gates, the first planetary core drivers came online. Machines not built for violence, now whispering in frequencies no one had ever measured. The planet was listening, and it was learning. The chamber beneath Mare Serenitatis hadn't been touched in 30 years. Most didn't know it existed. Built before the Earth-Mars resettlement accords, it was never intended for war. The engineers who carved it into Luna's southern crust thought they were designing an environmental cathedral, a place of planetary calibration, not devastation. Now, it echoed with war-footed voices, boot treads, and the slow awakening of machines that had never known anger. Admiral Taran Vance stepped onto the command gantry. Below him, a circular platform stretched nearly a kilometer across, suspended by alloy struts bored directly into the moon's rock. At its center stood the primary resonance director, a monolithic device shaped like a tuning fork, taller than a skyscraper, forged in segments and embedded with gravimetric filament coils. Once, it was meant to stabilize lunar tremors and regulate artificial gravity zones for long-term colonization. Now, its function had changed. "Begin startup sequence," Vance said. The technician beside him hesitated. "Sir, activation will cascade into every plate, even dormant ones." Esther, they were never stress-tested at this magnitude. These systems were for Martian crust. Controlled crusts, not this. Vance turned slowly. His uniform wasn't pressed, his eyes were sleepless, but his voice was level. "If you want to argue with someone, dig up the ones who built it, or stand beside me and make it mean something." Across the chamber, reactors stirred. Their cores glowed with a dull, contained blue. Controlled fusion running at a crawl until now. As one, the 6 main support nodes came online, each pumping energy into the resonance channels embedded in the lunar crust. They weren't building pressure, they were recording it. Every tremor, every shift, and soon every scream the planet below would make. On Earth, the transformation had already begun. In the 90s, Entire mining cities were evacuated overnight. Engineers in sealed suits descended into boreholes dug 2 decades earlier, shafts once intended to reach stable thermal pockets for geothermal terraforming had become utterly pointless in regard to. They began reactivating the crustal stabilizers, giant structures like skeletal turbines buried beneath tectonic shelves. Each machine bore a rusted label: Project, Final Covenant, Stage 1/Geoharmonic, Baber Array. The labels weren't removed, they were polished, then powered. Deep beneath the Pacific floor, in a forgotten station, surrounded by collapsing basalt walls, 3 scientists sat in a steel room lit by yellow emergency strips. The oldest among them, Dr. Hannah Reese, stared at a flickering map of pulse vectors running across every continent. "You want to drive the planet insane?" she said. Taryn's voice crackled over the uplink, flat and clean. "No. I want to make sure they hear what happens when we bleed. You're going to boil fault lines, rupture the plates. Then we die with meaning." Every crustal node, on every continent, was retuned. Not for pressure diffusion, not for seismic prevention, or amplification. The lunar drivers fed signal tones through orbital resonance bands, perfectly timed echoes designed to reflect and intensify Earth's natural tectonic groans. It wouldn't be a single blast, it would be a global choir of pain. And it had to be perfectly tuned. In Nairobi, children were loaded into subcore shelters, 5 kilometers deep, under old hydrogen bunkers that once stored atmospheric splitters. In Quebec, old metro systems were refitted with thermal dampeners and sealed oxygen lines. In Kazakhstan, entire families knelt under the flicker of failing LEDs, reading old books out loud while the world above began to rumble in soft, uncertain pulses. The instructions were clear. You will feel vibration. You will hear the bones of the earth move. Do not come up. At Luna Command, a silence settled as the final data relay blinked green. All stabilizer sites had confirmed, systems synced, pulses aligned. All that remained was the final resonance key, set to trigger once the Accord opened fire on targeted planetary zones. The planet would speak only after being wounded. It would be Earth's scream, one final broadcast, not in words, in frequency. Taryn Vance stood alone in the tuning corridor, a room lined with harmonic reflectors and signal calipers, humming at a barely perceptible tone. He placed one hand on the central pillar. It thrummed like a heartbeat. His sister's voice came back to him. "Peace isn't weakness. It's the strength to remember pain and still try." He closed his eyes. "We remembered." Then he walked away. In orbit, Accord fleets gathered. They saw no shields, no counterfleets, no superweapon. They saw a planet curling inward, a species crawling underground. They thought it was surrender, but far beneath the mantle, something ancient was waking. Not a weapon, a warning. The observation node aboard the Accord flagship Veshtar Prim was a chamber of calculated serenity. Floating above the upper control tier, embedded within a cocoon of psionic insulation, High Director Talvaran drifted in quiet review of Sol's trembling emissions. Around him, subordinate analysts rotated gently in zero-gravity cradles, their crystalline oculars focused on harmonic readouts streaming in from planetary relay beacons. The human's world was shifting, that was clear. Across the crust of the third planet, designated by the Accord as Primitive System Designate 3, NIX, volcanic channels bloomed open, venting superheated gas from tectonic seams. Oceanic ridges released seismic shock pulses. The moon, Luna, displayed unregistered gravitic oscillations that threw off calibration for 2 full seconds before the autocorrect routines compensated. Talvaran rotated his attention node to face the readout. The energy spikes were messy, undisciplined, random. A soft vibration passed through the chamber. A vocal emission from senior tactical scribe Vrolak, seated in the inner ring. It was the closest thing their kind had to a laugh. They're trying to shield themselves with volcanoes. A ripple of amusement pulsed through the control pod. Another analyst emitted a dry signal burst, forwarding the seismic map to the command lattice. Terrestrial crust activation appears unstructured, possibly symbolic. A final cultural display. The High Director allowed the brief indulgence of superiority to pass without interruption. He had always viewed organic species, especially the young ones, as prone to spectacle in their extinction rituals. Fire, chant, ruin, the last breath of the unsophisticated. He activated the mission directive. Proceed with surgical correction, 3 strikes, Luna harmonic node, Earth desertic generator, oceanic subduction spine, minimal debris, fallout, full sterilization, not yet authorized. The first strike hit Luna. Not with fanfare, not with theatrics, just a beam of violet cord energy focused through a prism, engine buried. In the Accords, forward dreadnought. It lanced down through the vacuum, pierced the southern crust near Mare Imbrium, and detonated 12 kilometers beneath the surface. The resonance towers, those ancient forks of steel and quantum filament, did not collapse. They screamed. Not audibly, not even in wave form. But the readings that came back to Earth's control stations, still active for now, showed a spike in harmonic radiation that surpassed known core lattice output by a factor of 16. That had never been tested. It had only been theorized. And the theory said one thing: feedback. The second strike hit the Sahara node. It was never designed to withstand orbital bombardment. It wasn't a military complex. It was a repurposed geoengineering facility, once meant to green deserts and temper seasonal flux. When the energy beam hit, it cracked the shielding like glass. The blast tunneled straight into the crust, vaporizing 10,000 kilometers of subterranean lattice. Above it, sand turned to flame. Cities disappeared in seconds. Refugee corridors vaporized with the people still moving inside them. But underneath that horror, inside the moment the beam carved its tunnel, subharmonic arrays transmitted their final echo, amplifying the rupture through the planet's lattice like a bell struck by lightning. The third strike landed deep in the Pacific. The seabed erupted. Tsunamis surged outward in concentric rings. Island chains vanished before alarms could finish broadcasting. But as water boiled and rose in titanic clouds, the seafloor itself shifted. The plates cracked, intentionally. The stabilizer arrays were gone, but the resonance signal they had uploaded into the mantle before destruction did not vanish. It grew louder. In the command chamber beneath Luna's fractured crust, Admiral Terran Vance stood beside a console no longer tracking military assets, but frequencies. A wall of vertical bars pulsed in unison. Each one corresponded to a tectonic feedback channel. Each one was now lit red. A scientist, young, face pale, eyes hollow, pointed to the Western Hemisphere. "Sir, the core is beginning to shift polarity." "Expected," Vance said. "Expected?" the man asked, voice cracking. "We're boiling the planet alive." Vance turned to face him. There was no anger, no cruelty, just something heavier. "This isn't a survival protocol, this is a message." "We warned them with peace, they answered with fire. Now we answer with the last sound our world can make." The amplification sequence initiated itself. There was no final button, no dramatic order, only a cascade, one resonance echo bouncing into the next, amplified by molten iron, redirected by buried lattices, and sustained by what was left of Luna's still screaming machines. It began as a tremor, then a pulse, then a sound that no life form could hear, but every synthetic system could feel. Back aboard the Veshtar Prim, High Director Talvrain felt a shudder ripple through the command node. He opened a sensor feed. The energy from Earth had shifted. It was no longer undirected. It had become rhythmic, artificial, targeted. The laughter died. "Recalibrate the receivers," he said. "There is signal leakage from planetary resonance bands." A technician responded. "The leak originated from our own bombardment. We destabilized the crustal junctions. They're using the rupture as an amplifier." Telferes didn't blink. "Impossible. Their signal architecture is centuries behind." "Not anymore," the tech interrupted. "They hijacked our beam harmonics. They tuned it with their death." The chamber fell still. Another reading came in. It showed the Accord's own command channels, once isolated by secure frequency division, now experiencing recursive feedback. Talvern hissed. "Shut it down, all of it. Silence the cradle before it speaks again." It was already too late. On Earth, ash blanketed the cities. People wept beneath concrete bunkers, holding children too young to understand why the sky had turned to fire. In shelters, old songs played, recordings passed hand to hand, words recited not because they helped, but because they gave the illusion that something still mattered. And beneath it all, the world groaned. Not in death, in awakening. What the Accord had mocked was never a shield. It was a mouth. And now, Earth was speaking back. It began with a flicker. Aboard the Cathar Valak, one of the Accord's primary dreadnoughts orbiting high above Earth's equator, the ship mind initiated its routine diagnostic cycle. 30,000 control subroutines cycled through propulsion metrics, shield harmonics, life support oscillations, and interfleet comm relays. It found no fault. Then, at timestamp December 67th, 4:32, the gravitic lens flinched. Only for a microsecond. Only by a hair. But the ship mind noticed. Within 9 seconds, 12 more anomalies appeared. They followed no thermal pattern, no EM spectrum logic. They were soundless, directionless, frequencies twisted sideways, neither ascending nor descending, simply folding in place. The ship mind attempted to filter them out. They passed through the filters. The final diagnostic line before the cascade error read. Signal contamination, organic resonance, impossible. On the Veshtar Prim, the flagship of the Accord fleet, High Director Talvaran observed the ripple. One by one, the ships in his formation dimmed. Their radiant cores, once visible from orbit as violet flares, dimmed as if smothered by unseen pressure. Command channels flooded with static so dense it began echoing. Signal waves folding back on themselves like tides pulled in two directions. "Confirm encryption loss," he ordered. A tech officer rotated toward him. "We have not lost encryption," it said. "We've lost definition. The commands still exist, but they are indistinguishable from planetary signal drift." "Which signal drift?" Talvaran asked. The answer came slow. The ones originating from Earth's crust. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. There was no beam, no explosion, no clear line of attack. But across the Accord fleet, crystalline hulls began to tremble. Gravitic cores pulsed out of phase, unable to stabilize against invisible rhythmic pressure. Hull integrity reports returned bizarre readings: atomic lattice distortion, spontaneous compression of internal oxygen flows, momentary inversion of artificial gravity. It felt like the universe itself was bending. And then, all at once, it broke. The Thrun Ket was the first to shatter. A dreadnought nearly 8 kilometers long, its shield lattice collapsed in silence. Not from energy overload, but from contradictory frequency input that convinced the ship it existed in multiple locations at once. Bulkheads split, decks folded, life forms screamed and vanished as oxygen compressed into walls of invisible pressure and re-excluded in reverse. One crewman survived long enough to see the bridge turn inside out. His last word was not a cry. It was a question. "Why is the floor breathing?" Across the fleet, Chaos bloomed. Fleet formations dissolved as each vessel's AI screamed silently into the void, logic loops collapsing under recursive data. Tactical software attempted to reroute commands only to find the input strings duplicated, reversed, and rewritten by gravitational echo. Quantum command relays, once pristine and absolute, now carried echoes of Earth's dying crust. Orders came out wrong. Engage defense pattern Omega-3 became disengage firebank, reverse coordinates, shut down. No one understood the source, because it had no transmitter, no tower, no signature. It came from a planet, a wounded, burning planet that should have been screaming in agony, not singing in war. Humanity had been listening. Now it answered. Aboard the UNS Valor Reclaimed, Lieutenant Rios stared in disbelief as the Accord fleet on his tactical display lit up in a cascade of irregular pulses. They're falling out of sync, he said. Captain Andre Vex leaned over his shoulder. Is this jamming? No. Their AI sync spines being flooded. Something on Earth is overriding their own harmonics. From the ground? From inside the ground. Vex didn't hesitate. Launch pods, every boarding squad we've got. Like wasps swarming a cracked beehive, the human assault pods emerged from orbit, silent and dark, designed decades ago for asteroid capture. Now they were armed with mag saws and breaching clamps. The first pods struck the hull of the Val Thar Kes, a mid-weight command frigate already reeling from internal temperature fluctuations. The Accord's hull, normally a single piece of refracted alloy crystal, had begun to spiderweb. The boarding charges ignited with old-fashioned thermite. And just like that, humans climbed into God's ships. Inside the frigate's corridor, Sergeant Malik Troy kicked the remains of a shattered door aside. His HUD flickered from green to amber, the grav field unstable. The passage pulsed under his boots, as if the ship itself was trying to breathe. Or reject him. They moved fast, Fireteam Delta 7. 4 Marines, no support. They didn't need it. The Accord crew weren't shooting. They were convulsing. 6 alien officers writhed against the corridor wall. Their limbs jerked at unnatural angles, their eyes had no focus. One let out a high-pitched scream that shattered the glass in Troy's HUD overlay. He put a bullet through its spine. Then another, and then another. The team advanced, methodical. The hallway flickered with pale light, and a long resonance tremor passed through the wall, knocking 2 Marines to their knees. Feels like we're inside a throat, someone muttered. Troy grunted. Then keep shooting until we hit the teeth. In orbit, the Accord formation collapsed fully. Chips drifted apart. Some still moved, but not with purpose. Others rotated slowly, their engines misfiring. One dreadnought slammed into a command tower on a neighboring cruiser, sending both into uncontrolled spin. The battle was no longer a fight. It was dissection. Humanity, once laughably outgunned, surged into the openings. Swarm missiles, railguns, manual plasma cannons. No synchronization, no polish, just rage and method. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't beautiful. It was ruin through disruption. And the Accord, beings of precision, of protocol, of signal and purity, had no answer to a world that screamed without syntax. At Luna Command, Vance stood beneath the resonance map, now filled with slow, steady pulses. Each pulse was a fracture point. Each fracture point was an enemy fleet, dying. A junior officer approached, voice shaking. "Sir, we're winning." "No," Vance said. He stared at the readout, each pulse a heartbeat from the molten core of a half-dead world. "We're not winning, we're making sure they remember why they lost." And far below them all, Earth trembled again. Not with weakness, with rhythm. The scream had become a song. And that song was death. The moon broke first. From orbit, Luna's surface didn't shatter in a sudden explosion or a cinematic rupture. It peeled. The crust, already spider-webbed with fractures from the Accord's precision strike days earlier, now began to lift away in jagged spiraling sections. Entire segments rose from the lunar body as though pulled by invisible cords, breaking free in slow, horrifying arcs. And then came the white. Not white, not even plasma flu. It was something deeper. Raw, molten gold, bleeding through from the moon's core like a wound in space-time itself. Luna had never been a weapon. It had been a tuning fork. Now its last note was playing, and the resonance tore through the surrounding space like a thunderclap frozen in time. Dozens of Accord ships, still attempting to re-establish formation, were caught in the expanding gravitic bloom. Their hulls jerked sideways, suddenly dragged by Luna's irregular, dying pull. Artificial gravity fields collided, overcorrected, and spun entire cruisers into one another like broken instruments dropped onto a marble floor. One dreadnought, the Tesseract Prime, attempted emergency warp translation. It vanished from local space with a shimmer and reappeared 6 seconds later with half its hull embedded in a falling lunar fragment. It burned for 9 seconds, then vanished entirely. Inside Luna Command's primary resonance chamber, alarms had already gone silent. The only sound was the deep, thrumming echo that pulsed through the floor. Earth's crust, now fully engaged in its final operation. Admiral Terran Vance stood at the edge of the harmonic array, eyes locked on the waveform display. Every line pulsed red. Every red pulse meant a continent was bleeding signal into the final amplifier. He didn't ask for status updates. There was no one left to update him. The room had cleared when the containment fields buckled 2 hours earlier. Only Vance and a single technician remained, the latter strapped into a station chair, hands shaking. Vance rested a hand on the man's shoulder. "Synchronize all nodes," he said. The technician hesitated. "Sir, this is it. Once the signal completes, there's no feedback path, no delay, no return." Vance nodded once. "Then don't miss." Far below, Earth's core had already begun to spin out of sync with its mantle. The resonance lattice buried across tectonic seams, once meant to rebalance planetary plates, now served only one purpose: concentration. Tectonic plates shuddered, not from pressure, but from alignment. Magma rivers were drawn into rigid paths. Fault lines converged into symmetrical arcs. Heat and gravity and motion, shaped and focused, compressed into a single direction. The planet wasn't collapsing. It was loading. In low orbit, the Accord's grand flagship, Veshtar Prim, floated above the Earth, still unbreached, still untouched. It was massive, nearly 20 kilometers in length, shaped like a crown turned sideways. Its central command ring spun independently of the hull, maintaining temporal distortion against local interference. Inside, High Director Tulvarin had ceased issuing commands. There was nothing left to command. His fleets were dead. His comms were echoes. His AI relays had burned themselves out, screaming into silence. Now, he watched Earth through the flagship's OmniView display. Its surface buckled and breathed, not randomly, deliberately, like a throat building for a final word. On Luna, the harmonic pillars detonated, one by one. The sequence was perfect. Each collapse translated back into Earth's crust via buried resonance links, folded pulses racing at light speed through channels carved beneath continents. The technician at Vance's side whispered, "We've passed critical." Vance didn't respond. He only stared at the line on the display, now glowing white, a color not meant to exist in these systems. The core had aligned. The planets screamed, and the scream became light. From the Pacific Shelf, through the Sahara conduit, into the polar caps and out through Luna's final cavity, the beam emerged. Vast, perfect, and ancient in its simplicity. It did not arc. It did not twist. It punched. A solid column of energy, gravity, and harmonic death tore across the sky, slicing through debris and ash and shattered moonrock. It struck the Veshtar Prim at a velocity not measured in distance per second, but in tectonic compression per pulse. Inside the flagship, Talvarin saw the flash a fraction of a second before it arrived. His final words were not a declaration of war or peace. They were an error report. Primary shielding cannot resolve source harmonic, input phase violates. The rest never came. The Veshtar Prime did not explode. It disassembled. One layer at a time, its hull turned to particles, ionized dust, stripped from cohesion by a waveform older than mathematics. The command ring vanished. The gravity core inverted, then folded inward, disappearing entirely. What remained fell like ash across orbit, and Earth for a moment was silent. At Luna Command, the technician gasped as the screens blacked out, not from enemy interference, but because Earth itself had finally burned through the grid. Vance sat down slowly. His joints didn't bend well anymore. His spine ached. His heart was failing. None of it mattered. After remap, through the observation slit, he could already see the plume rising, magma cresting over the lunar horizon as the stabilizers failed, atmosphere venting, crust falling into itself. He leaned back in the chair. Whispers of static echoed through dead systems. One final breath. "It's done," he said. No one replied. The moon groaned one last time, and then went dark. The sky has not been blue since... The voice is clear. Jan, steady. A child born on Mars, her face cast in the faint red shadow of the dome's canopy. She speaks not to comfort, not to inspire, but because someone asked her what she remembers of Earth. The footage begins with a slow pan-orbital footage, recorded from one of the last functional satellites still broadcasting above the equator. Earth turns slowly beneath a veil of ash and fire. The continents are misshapen, as if rearranged by the hands of something too large, too careless to understand the meaning of what it broke. North America is no longer a solid landmass. The Central States are an inland sea now, dark and steaming. Asia is fractured. Much of the eastern coastline is gone, swallowed by tectonic collapse. Great plates of land drift miles apart, with glowing seams marking where they were once whole. Africa burns at its center, slow and unending. The Sahara, once dry and vast, has become a molten basin. Lava veins pumping in patterns once meant only for the inner mantle. Europe is largely silent. Its data relays fail to report. Communication has not resumed since the final pulse. Oceans now boil in certain regions, the air hangs heavy, and Luna no longer orbits. What was once Earth's oldest companion is now a belt of shattered stone, glimmering with faint resonant signatures, still echoing the scream it helped broadcast. "I have never seen the ocean," the girl continues. "I've never felt grass. We don't grow it under the dome. It takes too much water. But I saw my mother cry the first time she heard birds again. Not on Earth, in a habitat," she said. "That's how we know we're still human. If we remember the sound of something we don't have anymore." Across the solar system, what remains of humanity clings to survival, not triumph, not celebration. To survival. Orbital habitats, once luxury stations for interstellar trade or private science enclaves, are now lifeboats. Power-conserving, air-recycling, jury-rigged nests for the last few million who made it off-world in time. Mars holds the largest population. The terraforming domes, once experimental, are now overcrowded, stretched beyond their tolerances. Entire sections have been closed off due to system degradation. Children grow up beneath red ceilings, speaking of blue skies like ancient myths. The arcologies, deep underground bastions beneath Earth's crust, still hold some life, but connection to most has been lost. Whether those inside endure, no one can say. Back in orbit, the Accord's remaining fleets drift at a distance. They have not advanced. They have not fired. They do not move. When the Veshtar Prim fell, it wasn't just a flagship that was lost. It was certainty. It was the idea of order made manifest. The Grand Fleet was meant to bring correction, not die screaming in silent orbital ruin. Now the Accord Assembly gathers not in triumph, but in fracture. Accord High Assembly. Session Transcript Redacted Version. Location: Secure Interstellar Relay Chamber, Sector A Theta. The Sol species weaponized a planet. They weaponized loss. We gave them deadlines. They answered with extinction-level pulses. They are unpredictable, mad. No, not mad, that would suggest they have no pattern, but this. This was pattern. This was orchestration. What manner of species chooses annihilation as a strategy? Nobody fears nothing left to lose. Or worse, one that never feared at all. The Sol system is marked black in the Accord's updated stellar charts. A full quarantine, no signal penetration, no diplomatic outreach, no terraforming probes. The region has been recoded in official Accord navigation protocols. Zone X null, no contact, no data integrity. Informally, the designation spreads faster under another name, whispered across command halls and cultural forums. The Dead Cradle. Back within Mars orbit, in the restored primary dome of Vallis Marineris Sector 3, a historian named Elias Vance begins cataloging the records of Earth's final days. He is Terran Vance's nephew, too young to remember his Aunt Alara's death, too old now to pretend any of it was distant. He records the children, the architects, the engineers, the last farmers who speak of crops they once planted on land that no longer breathes. His first archive entry is short. We survived, and in doing so, we did not win. We simply refused to vanish unheard. There are moments of silence, and then moments of rebuilding, but always in the shadow of what was done. People speak in quiet tones now. When they laugh, it is soft. When they sing, it is mostly to the young. They do not look toward Earth expecting answers anymore. Only memories. The new maps are not drawn to scale. They are drawn in loss. But in every corridor, on Mars, in orbit, in deep crust shelters, there is one thing that remains untouched. The image of Alara Vance, hands bound, kneeling beneath alien light, speaking the last words of peace ever uttered by a human emissary. We never came to conquer, we came to remember. Now, all that's left is to decide what should never be forgotten. 312 years after Earth silenced the Accord's grand flagship, a permanent blockade remains in place. No probes enter, no data leaves. The Sol system has not been visited in over 3 centuries, not by ships, not by diplomats, not even by scavengers. The Accord has redrawn every official map to reflect the change. Sol is no longer color-coded with diplomatic clearance tags or environmental hazard ratings. It bears a different label now, one that appears in black script across all navigational cores, warning pilots, AI systems, and planetary descent routines. Z-Zax null, closed system, do not enter, no rescue, no reply. The message is not repeated. It doesn't need to be. No one dares approach. In the Accord's core hall of thought and memory, located beneath the vault chambers of Relic's capital moon, a formal address is delivered every 50 years to acknowledge the only defeat in Accord history. The attendance is mandatory for all ascending officers and archival authorities. The speech is not open to public adaptation, rewriting, or personal interpretation. It is recited word for word each time, carved into a black column of obsidian that stands beside a diagram of Earth's fractured crust. The species did not prevail through technological parity. It did not overpower us through numbers, nor did it outmaneuver our fleets. It simply reached its limit, and, when that limit was crossed, It removed the question of whether it should survive. It answered with finality. It gave up everything to make certain we would never ask it to yield again. We remember the cost. We do not repeat the mistake. There are no debates about this conclusion anymore. The Accord does not challenge it, refute it, or explore it further. The matter is resolved. Back in the Sol system, Earth remains. It is not thriving, it is not rebuilding, it is not dead, it is stable, it is cold, it is quiet. The continents have not returned to their former positions. North America is a split landmass, with its midsection now a permanent oceanic scar. The Eurasian plate collapsed in 3 places, and still vents low geothermal clouds through the ruins of former capitals. Africa has crusted over into volcanic desert, the central mantle ridge now exposed to the sky. The air is breathable only at lower elevations, where reconstruction arcologies still process atmosphere. The population is under 1 million, spread across 4 sealed arcologies and 12 orbital habitats. No contact is attempted beyond the system. No expansion protocols are planned. This was not a victory to build from. It was a message, and the message was delivered. Now Earth exists in maintenance, not ambition. The remains of Luna orbit in a loose debris field, fractured and frozen. At its center, however, a small station holds position. It is stabilized by gravitational anchor points and powered by internal fission systems that have operated without failure for over 200 years. Its singular function is to broadcast one word on an encrypted wideband frequency, exactly every 12 hours. The signal does not rotate, it does not change. It simply says, "Member." The Accord once tried to decode the transmission, not because it was unclear, but because the simplicity unsettled their deep logic systems. After 48 cycles of repetition, the inquiry was closed. The word was left unchallenged, and the Accord declared it non-aggressive, but non-ignorable. It still broadcasts. On Earth, beneath the scorched upper layers of what was once the Tibetan Plateau, a preserved structure remains. It is the only standing monument in the Sol system that has not corroded or been intentionally dismantled. It is not a temple, it is not a vault, it is a tomb. Set into reinforced alloy doors, polished by generations of maintenance teams, is a name carved in 4 languages: English, Latin, Accordic, Old Mandarin, and Galactic Binary Standard. Ilara Vance. The plaque does not mention her rank or origin. It offers no eulogy. Below the name is a message. She came to speak. They answered with silence. So we made the whole planet scream. Inside the tomb, protected by plasma seal and environmental lock, is a second chamber containing the final recorded message of her brother, Admiral Terran Vance. The log is not accessible remotely. It must be witnessed in person. In the dim silence of the tomb, the audio begins with static, then a single breath, then the voice. This was never the future we wanted. Peace was our first hope. Our last weapon was despair. And they left us nothing else. There is no second file. The log ends after 11 seconds. The console locks afterward and cannot be replayed for another 10 years. Humanity still exists. Its children live inside domes, under stars they cannot yet walk beneath. They do not speak of conquest. They are not taught expansion. They learn history. They learn restraint. They are told of the planet that broke itself to be heard and the cost of teaching a lesson that required extinction-level force to express. They do not worship the scream. They study the silence that came afterward. No fleet ever returned. No Accord ambassador was ever sent again. No doctrine was ever written to propose reconciliation. Sol became an ending, not of a species, not of a war, but of a question. And so the record closes. No open loops, no new battles, no hidden fleets in cryo, no countdowns to retaliation. Earth survived, alone, respected, untouched. Above its charred surface, the old satellite drifts. Its outer hull is pockmarked by time, its core transmitter still functional, its beacon code unchanged. Every 12 hours it whispers the same thing. Remember, the Accord does. And so does every civilization that learned from what followed. The seal was broken, and nothing has ever dared try to close it again. But do you think, was humanity's final act justified? If peace is denied, does a species have the right to break itself just to be heard? Drop your answer in the comments below. Was it vengeance or was it survival? And if this story shook you, if the scream of Earth still echoes in your mind, hit that subscribe button for more cinematic, high-stakes HFY stories every week. Like, comment, share it with someone who believes in last stands.